Good evening, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank our Dr. Sushma and Dr. Sudha for inviting me for take the session of this webinar on ovulation. Chaitanya, Dr. Chaitanya Ashok Shambekar. I would like to introduce you. He is from Omega Hospital, Nagpur, who is a past president of Nagpur OB-Gynec Society, and he was the chairman of Infertility Committee of AMOGS, executive member of Maharashtra ISAR, member of Infertility, Endocrinology and Endoscopy Committee of FOXI, and he is the recipient of Kamila Viva FOXI Oration Award. He is a gold medalist in MBBS.
Hello, Mamta is not audible.
I think there is some.
No,
some
sometimes
issue there, ma'am.
Sudha, both
there is
video
some
and audio
Shastri, gold medal and Manwala, FOXI in many FOXI societies, and many others in MHS and member of PCP and DT committee Nagpur. Coming to the ovulation induction, which is a stepstone of all gynecologists. So especially in anovulatory infertility. So ovulation induction has a key role. Today he is enlightening us with the guidelines on ovulation induction with the recent updates. Welcoming you, sir, for this session of webinar on guidelines on ovulation induction. Dr. Chaitanya.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mamta. I think, Sachin, I am not able to share my screen. So if you can just make me a co-host, I'll be able to share the screen.
Abhijit, sir,
Abhijit, please do the needful, please.
Yeah, now I am able to. Yeah.
Co-host.
Yeah. So the topic for today's discussion is guidelines for ovarian stimulation. And my special thanks to Mysore OBGYN Society for giving me this opportunity. Thanks, Dr. Sudha, Dr. Sushma, and Dr. Ambarish Shah, Dr. Mamta. Thank you, MQR, and of course, Dr. Vidya, my friend from Bangalore. I bring greeting from Nagpur OBGYN Society and AMOGS. The topic for today's discussion is ovarian stimulation guidelines. If you just look at the guidelines for ovarian stimulation, you'll find that till last year, 2019, almost there were no guidelines for ovarian stimulation. And then came the ISHRI guidelines for ovarian stimulation. And I will be basically discussing these guidelines, which are important for all of us to understand, because the treatment plan will depend on these guidelines, and we have to follow these guidelines. We all know that infertility is a disease and it has got an impact on quality of life. So whenever we do stimulation, we get multiple oocytes, and this is the cornerstone in the treatment of IVF or IUI, or for that matter, even time intercourse. And why do we do ovarian stimulation? Because we want to eliminate the risk of having no oocytes at all and getting more embryos to put the best one inside the uterus. Now, whenever there is a stimulation, we get the response to the stimulation. And this response can be poor, normal, or excessive. Now, GDG recommendation says that you should not say poor response, you should say low response, because poor is not actually a very good terminology. So you can say low response, normal response, and high response. And it all depends on the number of oocytes that are obtained on stimulation. If they are more than 18, you call it high response. If less than 3, you call it low response. Now, the basics of ovarian stimulation are very simple. We try to understand this. Normally, what happens that we give normally naturally only one follicle becomes a dominant follicle. It ruptures and the ovulation takes place. Now we give gonadotropins so that we get more follicles. And what is the source of these follicles? It is, of course, ovarian antral follicles, which are always getting recruited by cyclical recruitment. Now you can manipulate this cycle at some or the other stages with some drugs which are called as adjuvants, and you can stimulate the ovulation by various drugs. The drugs which are available basically are gonadotropins, clomiphene citrate, and letrozole, which are given in various doses, like CC standard dose is 100 milligram, letrozole standard dose is 2.5 milligram BD, and gonadotropin standard dose is 150 to 225 IU is the standard dose. And then along with these drugs, we give something to prevent premature LH surge, which is equally important. That is either agonist or an antagonist. So it is very simple. And after this, we finally do the correction of the endometrium because endometrium is at loss because of the stimulation. Endometrium gets advanced, and you need to correct the endometrium by giving some luteal phase support. So that is how the ovarian stimulation goes. Now we go to the basics and try to understand. This is a very important diagram, and I think you all should take a screenshot of this diagram because this is the basis of ovarian stimulation. If you look at the follicles, there is a pool of follicles, that is primordial follicles, and out of these primordial follicles, there is a recruitment stage where primary follicles become secondary follicles, they become small anther follicles, and then they dominate and then they ovulate. Now, if you just look at this diagram, you'll find that this whole process of recruitment takes almost more than 120 days. That means this is the period of 120 days which can be utilized for manipulation of the ovarian stimulation. Usually what we do is we utilize this period which is called as endocrinological control of the stimulation, but there is a paracrine control also. And if you look at the drugs, you can use DHEA, androgen or testosterone during the paracrine control to have a better effect. And AMH can be calculated at any stage throughout the ovulation. That is the beauty of AMH. If you look at the endocrine control starts from the day of recruitment, where the small anther follicles they start getting dominant, and here this is the stage which is dependent on the FSH or gonadotrophins, and here you can give gonadotrophins for the stimulation. So this is how this whole process of ovarian stimulation goes, and there is a debate regarding many issues as far as ovarian stimulation is concerned. What should be the dose of the drug? What should be the trigger factor? And what are the adjuvants which are used? There are many topics for debates. Like some people say more the merrier. Some people say less is more. While some people say that we need eggs and not all eggs. So some people are in favor of getting as much. They are trying to extract the eggs. They are greedy. They want as many eggs as possible. While some people say that don't go for so many eggs. Just try to stimulate the ovary in such a way that you get optimum number of eggs, not too many eggs, because too many eggs may actually spoil the situation. So now, whenever we are discussing these guidelines, we must follow the guidelines. Actually, we have to follow the guidelines. There is no doubt about it because they are led by experts. However, the individualized approach and the personal experience also play a role in the management of the patient. And therefore, in some of the situations, we may agree to disagree. There is no debate, it is just a discussion. But sometimes we actually do not follow guidelines because we are practically thinking in favor of the betterment of the patient, or we want results, and then we have to do something which may not be given in the guidelines, but we do follow those things which are like clinical experiences, we can say. The first part of the ovarian stimulation is pre-stimulation management. And before starting stimulation, you have to go for the ovarian reserve testing. And this ovarian reserve testing, this is the list of all the investigations which are all the factors which are utilized for ORT. They include AFC, AMH, FSH, etc., etc. And you just look at the guidelines. Guidelines say that AFC is a good indicator or it is a good predictor of ovarian response. It is alone reliable and good predictor. AMH is also alone and reliable. FSH alone is not sufficiently reliable. Mind well, because most of the practitioners are still doing FSH as the test of ovarian reserve marker, but FSH is not, it is actually losing its significance, and day by day we are relying more on AMH. So it is said that FSH alone is not reliable. Inhibin E2 is not a predictor. Age alone is not a reliable, though it may give you idea. BMI alone is not a predictor. So if the patient is obese, that does not mean that she may not respond. And progesterone is also not reliable. So these are the guidelines. So as per guidelines, that there are only two factors which are given importance. One is AMH and second is AFC. AFC and AMH are recommended over other ovarian reserve testing as the reliable and predict for the prediction of the high response or the poor response. So what are the various factors which are markers of the ovarian reserve testing? These are the markers. This is the chart, and I want you all to take a screenshot of this chart because this chart is extremely important. These are the 4 markers which are important: age, AMH, FSH, and AFC. Now you just try to compare all these markers. You will find that for prediction of poor response, yes, age is good, AMH is good, FSH is also good. FSH is high, the response is poor. AMH is low, response is poor. AFC is also a good marker. But for the prediction of hyper response, see friends, for hyper response, FSH is not a good marker, but AMH is a good marker along with AFC. Now, if you look at the intercycle and intracycle variability, this intercycle variability is low with AMH and it is very high with FSH, and that is the reason why AMH can be done during the any time during the period of menstrual cycle. You can do it whenever the patient comes to you, but FSH you have to do only on day 2. One more factor which I would like to highlight here is that if your patient is on OC pills, or if your patient is on GnRH analogs like Leupride depot, in that situation you cannot do FSH testing because it is not reliable. But AMH is reliable even if the patient is on some medications like OC pills, and that is where there is an age of AMH as compared to FSH. Now, ultrasound is something which is blinded to operator. That means if the operator is good, the ultrasound results are good. But if the operator is a newcomer and he or she is under taking the training or is still learning, then maybe you may not rely on that operator. So applicable to all patients is AMH and age. And cheapness, of course, age is the cheapest one, provided the patient tells her correct age, because many times, people are in the habit of not telling the correct age. So if the patient is, you may have to refer her Aadhaar card, but if the patient does not tell her correct age, then maybe age is of no use. But otherwise, age, AMH and FSH and AFC, AMH and AFC are the 2 markers which are most reliable. Now, after this ovarian reserve testing, we go to the next point, and that is pre-treatment therapies. Before starting treatment for ovarian stimulation, as you all must be aware, that we give many drugs. Some people they give estrogen, some people they give progesterone, OC pills, or even some patients, the people they give antagonist also. Now, what is the key question is whether these drugs are important and are they good for treatment before starting ovarian stimulation? And the answer is very simple. All these drugs are of no use, and therefore these drugs should not be given as a pre-treatment protocol. The only drug which can be given is OCP, and OCPs can be given only for scheduling purpose. That means suppose the patient is on ovarian stimulation, and if you want to actually adjust the cycle, or if you want to in the benefit of the patient as well as doctor, suppose you want to avoid weekends, or suppose you want to avoid some period in the month where the patient is not available, or the doctor is not available. In that case, for scheduling purpose, OC pills can be used. Otherwise, all these drugs, the guidelines say, should not be given. But still, we do give some drugs, like many people they give OC pills to suppress LH levels in PCOS, because in PCOS there is a high LH level, and there are many studies which say that if you give OC pills in PCO, the LH levels are suppressed and you get better results. But as far as the guidelines are concerned, guidelines are clear cut, say that there is no role of pre-treatment OC pills except for scheduling of cycles. Next is oral drugs. Now we know that there are 2 drugs which are important. There are so many drugs, but I will be discussing only 2 drugs, CC and letrozole. These 2 drugs can be used for IUI cycles, for time intercourse, and also in the soft protocols of IVF cycles. But here I would like to tell you one thing, that letrozole is becoming more and more popular nowadays, friends, and CC is now taking a backseat. CC is now considered as a second-line treatment because of many advantages of letrozole. Letrozole is a drug which gives you good endometrium. Letrozole is a drug which gives you monofollicular development, and that is the reason letrozole is very popular. And even if you look at the guidelines of PCOS 2018 guidelines, it is clearly said that letrozole should be considered as first-line pharmacological treatment for ovulation induction in women with PCOS with anovulatory infertility. So CC is now has taken a backseat, and letrozole is the drug of choice. So how do we go ahead? Any treatment, whenever if you are giving CC, you start with 100 milligram. 50 milligram is usually not starting dose because there is something called as cutting corner regime. It is said that if you start with a low dose of 50 milligram, 50% of the patients may not ovulate at all. And therefore, instead of starting with a low dose of 50 milligram, it is preferred to start with 100 milligram dose, and then you may increase the dose to 150, 200, and maximum 250 milligram per day. Adjuvants can be tried if there is no response, and gonadotropins can be tried if there is no response. Similarly, letrozole, there are many protocols, but the most popular protocol is 2.5 milligram BD for 5 days from day 2 of menses. Then there is something called a step-up protocol where the letrozole is given in the dose of 1 tablet, 2 tablets, 3 tablets, 4 tablets, and 5 tablets in a day. Then there is something called a stair-up protocol where letrozole is given in the first month 2.5 milligram OD for 5 days, second month 2.5 milligram BD for 5 days, and third month 2.5 milligram BD for 5 days. That is how you go on increasing the dose. That is called a stair-up protocol. Now, as far as IUI is concerned, in IUI protocols, CC and letrozole is many times given along with gonadotropins. Gonadotropins alone is also used, and it is also considered as a good treatment. But oral agents are also used very commonly. And here, if you look at this study, you will find that CC alone will give you only 10% result. Letrozole may give you better result, but if you combine letrozole with gonadotropins, the result is almost equal to gonadotropins alone. That is almost 16 to 20%. So you get maximum results when you combine letrozole with gonadotropins. And that is the reason why we use this protocol most often in IUI, which is called as popular practical protocol. I call it Great Indian Jugadu protocol because here, what is the advantage of this protocol? Here you are actually saving on the cost because you are giving less injections and you are adding CC or letrozole from day 2 for 5 days, and then 6, 7, 8 days you give HMG or gonadotropins, and then you start ovulation studies on day 9 and do IUI as after the ovulation takes place. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act but a habit, and this is so true with ovulation stimulation or ovarian stimulation. The important point in ovarian stimulation is LH suppression. And you have to remember this point that there is something called as premature LH surge, which is seen in almost 25% of the ovarian stimulation cycles. And this premature LH surge will actually spoil the cycle. Why it will spoil the cycle? Because if there is a premature LH surge, what happens? There is a progesterone secretion and the endometrium is gone and the cycle is gone. And that is the reason why we give something called as LH suppression, which is done either with the help of agonist or antagonist. Agonist came first, then came antagonist. Agonists are of 3 types: long protocol, short protocol, and ultra short protocol. Out of these protocols, long protocol is preferred as per the guidelines, and antagonist in general is new, but it is preferred, and there is a clear-cut edge and the clear-cut preference to antagonist over agonist in all the guidelines. So what do guidelines say? Guidelines say that in agonist protocol, long protocol is preferred, and there is a clear-cut recommendation which says that antagonist protocol is preferred over agonist protocol. So you must know that antagonist protocol is preferred over agonist protocol. There is one novel method of prevention of LH surge, and that is called as use of oral progestins. Some people have tried this, and this is really good because you are cutting on the cost and you are also cutting on the injections. The injections are not given because agonists and antagonists are available as injectable form. But instead of that, if you give oral progestins, this oral progestin can actually prevent LH surge. The guidelines say that this is probably not recommended. Why it is so? Because when you give progesterone, what will happen? The endometrium will become secretory, and you don't want secretory endometrium to start with. But there is only one situation where you can use this protocol, and that is called as freeze all protocol. The protocol where you are not transferring the embryos, you can use this. So if there is progestin, oral progestin given to the patient, in that situation, actually you have to avoid transfers, because if you transfer the embryos, you will not get the results. So that is important. Just a minute. Just give me 1 minute. इकडे आवाज खूप येतो थोडासा. I'm sorry. Now we come to the next point, and that is the IVF cycles. And in IVF cycles, there are high responders, normal responders, and low responders. If you look at the high responders, like PCO patients, the guidelines are clear. It is said that antagonists are preferred over agonists. So antagonists are always good in high responders. Why? Because when you give antagonist, you can give agonist as a trigger, and therefore you can do freeze all, and therefore there is no chance of OHSS. So the guidelines say that antagonist protocol is preferred over agonist protocol in high responders and in PCOS patients. It is also said that we cannot have mild stimulation protocols in high responders. Like you cannot give CC, letrozole, or low dose protocols in high responders because these protocols usually do not work. If you look at the normal responders, again, normal responders, it is said that antagonists are preferred over agonists. And if you look at the low responders, I think you all should know this Poseidon criteria for low prognosis group. The patients of low response or diminished ovarian reserve are divided into 4 groups. Initially, there were Bologna criteria, which came in 2011, and then came this Poseidon criteria, which is actually a latest criteria for diminished ovarian reserve. The Poseidon has divided patients into 4 groups. Group 1 is the patient where the patients are young, less than 35 years. They have everything normal, AFC more than 5, AMH more than 1.2, but there is an unexpected poor response. So you do not expect poor response, but when you stimulate, you do not get good response. That is called as Poseidon group 1. In Poseidon group 2, the patients are more than 35 years of age. The age is more, but everything is normal. So you do not expect poor response, but you get unexpected poor response. Then there is a Poseidon group 3, where the patient's age is less, but they have everything low. AMH is low, AFC low, and you know that this patient is not going to respond. And Poseidon group 4 is where the age is also more than 35 and everything is again low and you are not expecting this. Now these categories are very important because here you can actually frame your treatment plan or you can decide your treatment plan depending on in which category the patient fits. Like if the patient is into Poseidon group 1, she is an unexpected patient. So first cycle you may get a surprise element where you may not get good response at all, but this is a surprise for you. But in Poseidon group 3, you know that the patient is having a problem, though she is young. And Poseidon group 4, you know that patient is more than 35 and there is a problem. So you can actually plan the treatment according to this group. And in poor responders, initially there was with much fanfare, they came with modified natural cycle and even natural cycle protocols where they said that you cannot actually, you don't have to give anything, you have to just give do the natural cycle and do the collection of the eggs, but this was not popular. What is popular is of course the antagonist protocol, and you may give some soft protocols like you can add CC or letrozole to these patients. And there is a tendency, you know, we have a tendency to increase the dose, and we usually start with a high dose of 375 or even 450 IU in low responders, but guidelines say that you should not go beyond 300 IU, and that is something which we all should remember. So don't try to be good in everything, be good in one thing. That is what makes you special. Now, next comes the types of gonadotropins. And a quick question is the type of stimulation drug associated with the efficacy and safety? And the answer is gonadotropins are gonadotropins are gonadotropins. That means any drug which is available in the form of injection gonadotropin, all are equal as far as the efficacy is concerned. So these are the various recommendations. See the recommendations. FSH versus HMG, equally recommended. Recommended FSH versus purified FSH, equally recommended. Recommended FSH versus highly purified FSH, equally recommended. FSH versus HMG in agonist, recommended. Recommended LH and recommended FSH, equally recommended. Only letrozole is not recommended. So you do not give only letrozole. You have to give gonadotropins, but all gonadotropins are same. Even the long-acting FSH, choreophyllotropium alpha, is also having the same effect as that of normal recombinant FSH. Then why so many products are available in the market, and how do we select the product? What is the deciding factor for gonadotropins? There are many factors. The first is the purity and batch to batch consistency. It is said that recombinant FSH has got a good batch to batch consistency as compared to the HMG or the urinary HMG or urinary products. Second is cost factor. Recombinant FSH are costly as compared to the urinary products. Recombinant FSH is better in patients of PCO because in PCO you require FSH to start with. In other patients like DOR patients, you may give FSH in the initial days and add LH to reduce the cost. That is, you can add HMG to reduce the cost, or you can also give recombinant LH. There is a recommendation which says that recombinant LH is good for patients with diminished ovarian reserve. Only factor is the cost. It is costly, but otherwise it is a good drug. The next point is the key question is, can we adjust the dose of gonadotropin? That means suppose you start with 150 hmg on day 1 and then you continue giving this 150 hmg for 10 days. On day 5 you feel like increasing the dose. You feel like giving 225 or 300 because there is no response. Recommendations are very clear. They say that modification does not influence pregnancy. Therefore, the dose should not be adjusted throughout the cycle. So continue with the same dose, because even if you increase the dose, you are desperate sometimes. You are desperate. You want good eggs, you want more eggs, so you increase the dose. Sometimes people they increase the dose from 150 to 600, but this desperation is of no use because it takes almost 9 to 10 days for this increased dose to act, and you cannot wait for such a long period. So you cannot increase the dose. That is very clear. So if you don't want to increase the dose, then what do? The most important thing is you start with the proper dose. So the starting dose is the most important point. ऐसा कहते हैं कि जो सफर की शुरुआत अच्छे से करते हैं वो मंजिल को भी पार करते हैं. बस एक बार चलने का हौसला रखिए. अच्छे इंसानों का तो रास्ते भी इंतजार करते हैं. I hope you people understand some Hindi, and this is a very nice share, and I hope you understand this. So starting dose is something which is important. Now we come to the next point, and that is adjuvants. The key question is, what about adjuvants? Are these adjuvants going to help as far as the efficacy and safety of ovarian stimulation is concerned? So see the list of adjuvants which are available. Metformin, myoinositol, testosterone, growth hormone, DHE, aspirin, indomethacin, sildenafil. All these drugs are tried by many. So if you look at the ASHRAE guidelines say that there is an insulin resistance which is seen in 75% of lean and 95% of obese PCO. And you can use metformin in the patients with insulin resistance. Many countries they use it as off-label drug, but it is used. And the key question is, can we add clomiphene citrate with metformin in the patients of treatment of PCOS? And what do guidelines say? Guidelines say that clomiphene citrate is a better drug than metformin as a ovarian stimulation inducing agent. So if you want to use as a ovulation induction drug, which is the drug of choice? CC is a drug of choice. But you add metformin to this CC, you will get better results. So if the patient is on metformin, you add CC. If the patient is on CC and not responding, you add metformin. So metformin is a good drug in combination, and the guidelines say that you can combine CC with metformin to get better results in the patients of PCOS. So the guidelines are very clear. And it is said that this combination works very well, and the best and the biggest advantage is the less expense and more convenience. That is the reason why, if you just look at this algorithm, this is a very important algorithm, and I think you all should take a screenshot of this algorithm as well, because this is the algorithm for PCOS, which says that you can start with CC. If there is no response, then you have to go to the next level treatment, that is gonadotropins. But before going to gonadotropins in CC resistant patient, you try metformin. So metformin is considered as a drug in between CC and gonadotropins. So before starting the injections, gonadotropins, which are very costly, what you can do is you can just try metformin in few cycles and you may get results. So CC is the drug which is cheap, oral drug, and it is good as an adjuvant. So it comes as a second line. Before second line, CC no response, metformin and CC no response, then go to the next level, that is gonadotropins. Now this metformin has an advantage. It is works very good as a cocktail. It blends very well with everything. So metformin तुम किसके साथ ले सकते हो, सीसी के साथ भी ले सकते हो, लेट्रोजोल के साथ भी ले सकते हो, और गोनाडोट्रोपिन्स के साथ भी ले सकते हो. That means even in IVF cycles, if you start CC along with gonadotropin, so start metformin along with gonadotropins, you get very good results. You get good oocyte quality and good egg quality. So the guidelines are very clear. They say that adjuvant metformin can be tried even in IVF patients, and the biggest advantage of metformin is that it prevents OHSS. So agonist protocol, antagonist protocol, add metformin, the OHSS is prevented, and therefore metformin can be tried as an adjuvant along with gonadotropins in PCOS. The key question is myoinositol. Dr. Vidya Bhatt was talking about myoinositol. The key question is, can we use myoinositol as an adjuvant in the treatment of PCOS patients? And the guidelines say, recommendations say that myoinositol should be used as an experimental therapy. But they are encouraging the use of myoinositol. Why they are encouraging the myoinositols? Guidelines say that you should encourage the use of myoinositol because it is cheap. It is just a B complex and it is giving good results, and there is a justification. This justification says that all data, emerging data is saying that there are benefits. Ovulation is good, metabolic and hormonal imbalance is corrected by a myoinositol. It is freely available, it is cheap, and has got limited side effects. And therefore, guidelines say that you can use myoinositol along with D-chiroinositol as a combination in the treatment of PCOS as an adjuvant. That is what guidelines say. This is the justification. Now, I agree to disagree with the guidelines of 2019. I was talking about the guidelines of PCOS. Now I am talking about the 2019 ovarian stimulation guidelines, which says that metformin is not recommended. Now, I think we all do not agree with this. We love this drug metformin, and you all will agree with me that we are using metformin in PCO patients day in and day out, and we are getting good results. So here I disagree with this, and I go with the PCO guidelines, which say that metformin should be used as an adjuvant in PCOS or hyperresponders. Now the next is diminished ovarian reserve. So to make a difference in someone's life, you don't have to be brilliant, rich, or beautiful, or perfect. You just have to care. So that is what is important. TLC is what we say is important. Tender living care is important in treatment. Now, in diminished ovarian reserve, all the guidelines say that all the drugs like growth hormone, testosterone, DHA, all drugs are not recommended, probably not recommended. Now they have used the word probably. And I would like to quote here one study. There is a study which has, tried to evaluate all the adjuvants for diminished ovarian reserve, and they found that the growth hormone is giving best results. So you can use growth hormone as an adjuvant in diminished ovarian reserve. The only problem is it is very costly. So गरीबों के लिए growth hormone के जगह पे कौन सा drug है? Another drug is DHA. So DHA can be tried. It is cheap. Then there is aspirin and sildenafil also, which is available. Aspirin, we use it. It is not recommended, but we use it because it gives you good blood supply, improves the blood supply. Sildenafil can also be used if you want to improve the blood supply. But pregnancy rate, there is no difference. I think Sudha madam, I have 5-10 minutes more to go. I can take 5 minutes.
Yeah, please. You can have 10.
Okay. Thank you so much. So aspirin and sildenafil guidelines say are not recommended, but I personally feel that these are the drugs which improve the blood supply. And whenever you find that the endometrium is thin, then definitely you can use aspirin and sildenafil to improve the blood supply. And I must agree here that we all use it, and I must say that we also use it in our hospital to improve the blood supply. Now, some people, they have tendency of doing investigations during stimulation. What are the investigations which are done? The investigations which are done are estrogen, progesterone, and a panel of estrogen, progesterone, and LH on the day of LH surge. It is said that all these investigations are not required and only ultrasound is sufficient. So ultrasound is sufficient, and all the other investigations like estrogen, progesterone are not required for the assessment of the cycle during stimulation. So if you are good in ultrasound is enough. A bird sitting on a tree is never afraid of the branch breaking because her trust is not on the branch but on its wings. And that is so true. We have trust on ultrasound, and ultrasound is such a wonderful tool which we have got with us that it helps in getting the good results. Now we go to the next part, and it is butyl phase support and trigger. Now, the most important thing is endometrial thickness. How thin is thin? That is the question. And there are many studies regarding the endometrial thickness. If you just look at all these studies, it is said that the researchers, they got results even with 3.7 millimeter of endometrium, 5.6 millimeter of endometrium. So what is important is not the endometrial thickness, but what is more important is the vascularity and the triple line of the endometrium. So this is what is important. It is said that even if you do not do the monitoring of the endometrium, but if your endometrium is good enough to have good vascularity and triple line, then you can get good implantation and good pregnancy rates. So the thickness really does not matter, but more or less, usually we all follow this, that 7 millimeter to 11 millimeter is considered as the good endometrial thickness, and less than 7 millimeter endometrial thickness is considered as not so good because you do not get good results with endometrial thickness less than 7 millimeter. But there are researchers who have found that even thin endometrium may give good results if the vascularity is good. Now, what about trigger? The drug which is used for trigger of ovulation is HCG. There is no doubt HCG is the drug of trigger, but there are many other drugs which are available. Now, this is a very important chart, and you all should know this because many of us, you may not be doing IVF, but you are all are doing IUI and time intercourse. And you should know that if the patient is on natural cycle, when to give trigger, if when the follicle is of 22 millimeter. If the patient is on letrozole or CC, when to give trigger, when the follicle is of 20 millimeter. And if the patient is on gonadotropins like HMG, when to give trigger, when the follicle is of 17 to 18 millimeter. So this is something which we all should follow. And when not to give trigger is also more important because you may land up in OHSS if you give trigger when it is not to be given or it is not expected out of you to give the trigger. What is that? If the patient is for IUI, if you get 3 follicles of more than 15 millimeter, or if you get 6 follicles of more than 12 millimeter, you should not give trigger. That is very clear. So when to give trigger and when not to give trigger is something which you all should know, and you should keep in mind all these guidelines which are extremely important. Now, as far as IVF is concerned, it is said that the decision of giving trigger should be taken on case to case basis, and usually 16 millimeter to 22 millimeter is the range. 16 millimeter to 22 millimeter is the range when you should give trigger depending on the various factors like how many days of gonadotropins you have got and what is the endometrial thickness. Now, initially, I remember when I started doing my IVF some 15 years back, we used to cancel the cycles, and the cancellation was very, it was something which was not very good thing to counsel to the patients. कि आपकी cycle cancel करनी पड़ेगी. We have to cancel the cycle. Something telling this to the patient is not very good, and it was very difficult to counsel the patient. When we used to cancel the cycle, when there were no follicles or when there were very large number of follicles. Now the recommendations say that in both the situations cancellation is not required. एक follicle important है, एक oocyte important है. Even a single oocyte is important. So even if you get oocyte which is single oocyte, even if you get a follicle with single follicle, you should not cancel the cycle. Try for the collection of the oocyte. Similarly, when you get very high number of eggs, then if the patient is on agonist protocol, remember friends, this is something which I'll discuss again. you can cancel the cycle, because agonist protocol you have to give you cannot give agonist trigger, you have to give HCG as a trigger. But if the patient is on antagonist protocol, you don't have to cancel the cycle. So you come back to the original first slide, which I have told you, that if the patient is hyper responder or high responder of PCOS, the antagonist is the drug of choice, not the agonist, because agonist, it is dangerous. OHS is very high. So that is something which is very important. Now, what are the drugs which are available for trigger? HCG 10,000. Usually we give HCG 10,000. Recombinant HCG is called as the RHCG, and this Ovitril drug, which is RHCG, is 6,500 unit of HCG. You can use agonist as a trigger, triptorelin as a trigger, and ILH as a trigger. But the guidelines say that LH should not be used as a trigger because it is very costly. But the guidelines say that HCG is good, both recombinant as well as urinary HCG is good. And guidelines say that if you want to do freeze-all policy, agonist trigger is preferred, where either you can give a GnRH agonist as leupride or triptorelin. And triptorelin in the dose of 0.1 to 0.4, leupride in the dose of 2 milligram is the drug of choice for trigger as an agonist trigger. Last part, I'll just take 2 minutes or maybe 5 minutes more, please. Luteal phase support. And for luteal phase support, there are various drugs which are available: progesterone, dydrogesterone, and HCG. HCG is not recommended because it will lead to again ovarian hyperstimulation. So only two drugs are available: progesterone and dydrogesterone. Now, why do we require luteal phase support? Because there is a multiple corpus luteal formation, and with this multiple corpus luteal formation, the endometrium gets advanced. And because of the advanced endometrium, you do not get good endometrium. And the tragedy of all the treatment of infertility is that you do ovarian stimulation for the treatment of infertility, and this ovarian stimulation becomes the cause of infertility. That is a paradox. So it becomes a cause of infertility, and to correct this luteal phase defect, which is because of the ovarian stimulation, you have to give progesterone support. So it is very clear that be it time intercourse, be it IUI, or be it IVF, you must give luteal phase support. And luteal phase support is in the form of progesterone. Progesterones are available in the various forms: intramuscular, oral, vaginal, transdermal, transrectal, nasal. Intramuscular was very popular because it is the best drug, but it is very difficult to take this drug. It is very painful, especially it is when it is oil based. Now, aqueous progesterone are also available, but vaginal progesterone are preferred because vaginal progesterone, there is a direct vaginal effect and the first pass effect, and therefore it is preferred. And out of these various progesterones which are available, vaginal progesterone have got this first pass uterine effect, and therefore you get very good results. And it is said that 90% of the patients have got good satisfaction, and therefore vaginal progesterone is preferred. And now the doses of progesterone, I will just read these doses. Last part: 50 milligram once a day for intramuscular progesterone, 25 milligram once a day for subcutaneous progesterone, 90 milligram once a day for vaginal progesterone, 200 milligram 3 times a day for micronized vaginal progesterone in oil capsule, 100 milligram 2 times a day micronized vaginal progesterone in starch suppositories, 400 milligram 2 times a day for vaginal pessary. So these are the standard drugs dosage which are recommended by the guidelines. And these standard drugs dosage are important because you have to use this dosage. Usually we give vaginal pessaries 400 milligram BD, and whenever we are giving other progesterones, these are the standard dosage which are important, and you should remember all these dosage and you should use this as a reference. And I must say that Lotus trial is the trial which has come with which has opened new avenues for the progesterone, that is oral progesterone. And dydrogesterone is the drug which is available now. It is an oral progesterone, and the beauty of this drug is that it has got a very good absorption. If you give natural macronized progesterone orally, what will happen? Patient will get giddiness, and most of the patients, they get so much severe giddiness that they cannot tolerate the drug. So natural macronized progesterone is usually not given orally because of the poor absorption and giddiness. But dydrogesterone is the drug of choice, and this is the photograph of George Dresinger. And I got an opportunity to have one-to-one talk with George Dresinger, who says that Lotus trial says that dydrogesterone is probably recommended for luteal phase support. So dydrogesterone is nowadays becoming more and more popular drug for the progesterone support. And estrogen can also be given. Recommendations say that you do not have to give estrogen, but if you just look at the Gardner, which is actually a Bible or Gita for all infertility doctors, treating doctors, Gardner says that E2 can be given as a luteal phase support whenever it is required. If you get thin endometrium, you can give estrogen as a luteal phase support, but guidelines say that it is not recommended. So I now conclude this by a last part, and that is prevention of OHSS. For prevention of OHSS, nowadays OHSS is becoming a history, and touch wood, by the grace of God, since last 1 to 2 years, we have not got even a single case of OHSS in our clinic. Why? Because we have got such a very good treatment available, and that is antagonist protocol, agonist trigger, and freeze all policy. Very clear. So give antagonist protocol, agonist as a trigger, and freeze the embryos and transfer them after 2 months or 1 month in the frozen embryo transfer cycle. This will completely 100% eliminate the chance of risk of OHSS. And nowadays we are getting more and more patients of cancer, and in cancer patients you have to follow some protocols or the stimulation protocols. There is something called as random start protocol. Random start protocol is the protocol where you start the stimulation from any day, because you don't have time. Patient comes to you, she is having ovarian cancer, you have to treat her, you have to operate her before or give her chemotherapy. Before giving a radiotherapy, chemotherapy, you have to start the stimulation and get the eggs as early as possible and then freeze them. For that, you can use random start protocol or dual stim protocol, where you can stimulate 2 times in one cycle. So these are the special protocols. So to sum up, ovarian stimulation is the integral part of the treatment. Smart use of ovulation induction agent is essential. Prevention of LSR is equally important, and treatment is not complete without proper luteal phase support. So so what is the at-home message? We all are sitting at the comfort of our home. So at-home message is very clear and loud and clear. कर्मण्य वाधिका रस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन. कर्म करते रहो, फल की आशा मत करो. And that is so true in the treatment of infertility. You have to go on treating the patient with compassion, with passion, with dedication, and tender loving care. Ultimately, God is great. You will get results. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mysore OBGYN Society, for giving me this opportunity. I visited Mysore couple of times, and I love Mysore Palace, and I love Mysore city. So hopefully, maybe next time we'll meet physically. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chaitanya, for your very informative and recent guidelines with all practical tips and with your beautiful quotes. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, please, Sushma.
Ma'am, there's one question. What is the dose of dydrogesterone for luteal support?
Yes, this is a very important question. Why? Because initially we used to use 10 milligram BD as a standard dose for luteal phase support with dydrogesterone. But the latest guidelines say that a luteal phase support with dydrogesterone, the dose is 10 milligram TDS, 3 times a day. So remember, friends, the dose is now 10 milligram TDS, even in IUI.
So one more question. What's the role of steroids?
Yes. As I told you, if you just look at the guidelines, you will find that the guidelines are very clear. They say that you should not use adjuvants, but still we use adjuvants. Steroids have got a role to play in many situations. Steroids are given in the patients where there is excess of androgen in PCO patients. Then steroids can be given if there is an inflammation. Suppose you start a treatment and you get some collection in the cavity, you may add steroids to these patients. And steroids can also be given in patients with anti-nuclear antibodies or some immunological factors where steroids are important, along with aspirin and heparin. So these are the 3 situations where we give steroids, and we usually give 10 milligram bisolone once a day, and we do not taper the dose. We start from day 1 of the cycle and continue it till the result, and then we stop it.
We have one more question. So, what's the recommendations on adjuvants and how long would you recommend it? Because metformin, we have been advocating as a very common adjuvant. How
Yeah.
long would you
Yeah,
advocate
I
it?
think a very good question.
Because
Very good
this
question.
drug is going to be misused by many.
Yes. If you just look at the guidelines, there are various guidelines which are uh, working on the role of metformin in pregnancy as well. So you give metformin for PCOS patients. You start metformin from 3 months, and you can give it for long term also. You have to just add B complex to this patient. But if you give metformin, the guidelines say that you can continue it for first trimester till first trimester, because this is the drug which is going to prevent the possibility of abortions as well. Now, American Diabetes Association ADA to 2021 guidelines say that metformin should not be continued after first trimester if it is indicated for in the GDM. In GDM, they say that the drug of choice is insulin. Only if the patient is not affording or not taking insulin because of the problem of injections, then you can shift the patient to metformin. But otherwise, metformin is the second line drug for the treatment of GDM. But yes, if the patient is for PCOS, you are giving metformin. Metformin should be continued till the first trimester.
Sushma, one more is there?
Madam, you're on mute.
Unmute, Sushma.
When do you start dydrogesterone after trigger for LPS?
For
That's the question.
for luteal phase support, dydrogesterone should be started from the day of pickup in IVF. Now, suppose you are doing IUI, then you should start dydrogesterone from the day of IUI.
Right.
And in IVF from the day of pickup. Now, the advantage of progesterone is it is like one man, many rules. Progesterone is not only a luteal phase support, it helps in quiescence of the uterus. And therefore, it will prevent the uterine contractions and therefore help in embryo transfer as well. And therefore, progesterone is not only a luteal phase support, but it will act as a uterine quiescent. Quiescence of the uterus is something which is achieved by progesterone.
Right, sir. We have one more question. How to use DHEA and dosage?
Yes. Actually, this DHA is actually which is available over the counter in USA. So DHA is the drug which is not a panacea, or it is not a magical stick which you give to the patient and the patient will conceive. But DHA is the drug which can be used as an adjuvant in diminished ovarian reserve. 75 milligram per day is the dose, should be given for at least 3 months. As I have shown you the diagram initially. That diagram shows that 120 days is the period of ovulation, or the primary follicles, then secondary follicles, then pre-antral follicles, then antral follicles. So this 120 days period is something which should be taken care of. Therefore, you have to start DHA 3 months before starting the treatment.
Right. We have one more question. Sir, what's the role of step-up protocol of letrozole? Maybe they want to elaborate the step-up protocol. Letrozole step-up protocol.
Yeah. See, I have told you about the letrozole protocols, not in details, just because there was no time for detailed discussion. But letrozole and CC, there is something called as CC resistance, and there is something called as letrozole resistance. And this letrozole has got less resistance as compared to CC, but letrozole is also known to cause resistance, and therefore you have to change the treatment. The only thing which is constant in life is change. So you have to go on changing treatment in infertility, otherwise you may not get results at all. So what is the change? The change is to change the protocols. So as I told you, you can do the step-up protocol where you can start with 2.5 milligram first day, 5 milligram second day, 7.5 milligram third day, and 10 milligram fourth day. That is how, and 12.5 milligram fifth day. That is how you do the step-up of the letrozole. This may give you good results. And there is also got a stair-up protocol where you can actually, first month if you do not get result, second month you increase the dose. But I must mention here one more point which is important, that only adjusting the dose of letrozole is not sufficient. you have to think of other factors also, like you have to add metformin, which we have already discussed. If you start continuously go on doing changes in the letrozole protocol and do not add anything, it may not help you. So adjuvants may also be used, like metformin can be given, myoinositol decanoinositol combination can also be given, and then you may go to the next step, that is gonadotropins. Letrozole resistance, you may go to the next step, but before going to that the step, you have to change the protocol.
Right, so we have one more. Can you repeat on same question on the steroids? Maybe the dosage they're asking.
Yeah, 10 milligram Viceron 10 milligram OD from the day of stimulation up to the result, that is for 1 month, and no step down or no that reduction of dose. We continue with the same dose throughout the cycle, and we stop it because it's a low dose. Viceron is low dose, so you don't have to reduce the dose.
Now, 1 second. I'd like to congratulate Dr. Chaitanya for such a wonderful topic on ovulation induction. It is like mathematics, I can say, in infertility. So like you should have proper things like, yeah, if it is like that, like that. So I like to ask you one important question for the benefit of postgraduates. What should be the normal value of AMH for the optimal fertility, number one? Number two, you said antral follicle count is very important predictor for the ovarian reserve. So how do a general gynecologist will do that? The routine scan and all. Like every time we cannot shift the send the patient, especially now in corona cases, so many cases are arising. We are not able to send the cases for scan and all. So how do we go about that? Those two important things.
Yeah. I'll take the first question first, and that is about AMH. And
Yeah.
as I told you, the significance of day 2 hormonal assays is now fading or losing because FSH and LH is no more that important, and AMH is now a investigation of choice as far as the ovarian reserve testing is concerned. Why? Because AMH is having so many advantages. There is no intracycle variability. You can do it at any time. Even if the patient is on OCPs, you can do it. But the problem with AMH was initially it was not a very good investigation because there were variations in the results. But now, since last couple of years, there is a standardization of the results, and it is said that 2 to 3.5 is considered as normal AMH levels. But many laboratories, they consider 1.1 to 3.5 as a normal level. So more or less, you can consider 1.1 to 3 as normal level. If the level of AMH is less than 1.1, it becomes diminished ovarian reserve. But if the AMH level is less than 2, then that means the patient is probably going into the ovarian failure. The AMH level, if it is more than 3.5, that means the patient is having PCOS, and this PCOS becomes overt PCOS if the AMH levels are more than 10. So more than 10 AMH, overt PCOS, more than 3.5 AMH, PCOS, 1.1 to 3.5, normal, 1.1 to 2, low side of normal, 2 to 3.5, absolutely normal. That is how you should remember.
Exactly.
And as
rightly
far as
asked by
ultrasound,
Yeah.
as far as the second question
The
I was
second
about to
question.
answer. As far as the ultrasound is concerned, I think you may not have abdominal probe with you, but you must have transvaginal probe with you. So because if you are doing, especially if you are a fertility expert, you cannot think of treating patients without a transvaginal probe. So the minimum requirement for any gynecologist who is about to start his or her clinic is to have an ultrasound machine with a good transvaginal sonography probe. That is sufficient. But what is important is man behind the machine. So only machine is not going to, suffice. What is important is the person who is doing the ultrasound. He must train herself or himself in doing good vaginal sonographies. And there, the hand movements are very important. And if you learn the transvaginal sonography properly, then you will not miss anything and you will become a good operator. And that is what is important. So experience is what is important. It matters.
Thank you.
Very rightly said, Dr. Chaitanya, that ultrasound